Welcome back to a Slice of News, where I cut you off a slice of news. In a tight special election race in Tennessee, Republican Matt Van Epps beat Democratic Representative Aftyn Behn, dashing the hopes of Democrats hoping to somehow manage to flip a Republican seat in deeply red Tennessee. Republican wins over Democrat in a very red area of a very red state. Not that surprising. The story could easily end there. There's more to it once you go beyond the extreme surface level. Despite being solid Republican country, the race was very close. The final vote count was somewhere around 52 to 46.8. Yeah, the Republican guy came out on top in the end, but it was by such a narrow margin that even as a loss, this actually feels like a bit of a win for Democrats. This was the congressional district that Donald Trump won in this past election by 20 points over Kamala. Those kind of gains in an off year really show that the winds really are changing towards Democrats. It feels like a good sign for these upcoming midterm elections where they are hoping to make huge gains in both the House and Senate. Even from the start, it was clear that Republicans weren't even sure that this was an easy win, despite being in a solidly red area that, as I said before, Donald Trump had won by 20 points in the election. Even as recently as the day before the election, Donald Trump himself was still sending out messages in support of the Republican candidate, villainizing the Democratic candidate, trying to portray her as a radical leftist that hated country music and Christianity, and urging Republicans to go out and vote for Matt Van Epps. And Republicans spent almost $1 million more than the Democrats when it came to political advertising leading into the election. But even despite all this messaging from high-profile Republicans and all the money that they spent in political advertising, early polls showed that it was an incredibly close race, to the point that when the polls closed on Tuesday, they actually had Behn up over Van Epps. For an incredibly brief moment, it actually seemed that the Democrat could actually win this. Of course, once the votes started being counted in earnest, that stopped being the case. But even when the votes turned solidly toward the Republican, the message was still clear. What could have ordinarily been an easy win wasn't. And Republicans should expect to lose big next year in the midterm elections. As former Republican advisor Matt Whitlock put it, if every House district in the country shifted left by the same amount, by 15 points, we would be looking at a blue wave far worse than 2018, an estimated 43 seat flips. He went on to call it one of the biggest flashing red light warning signs we've seen yet for Republicans. And yeah, I completely agree with that assessment. I really think that Republicans have a good reason to be worried, and they should be. Voters everywhere, even in deeply Republican areas, are waking up to the fact that Republican leadership is a failure, and the only way to fix it is to get rid of them and replace them by Democrats. Yeah, when the vote totals came out in that special election in Tennessee, I was disappointed, because I was like, oh, we were so close. We almost won it. But I wasn't surprised. The chances were very low that Behn was going to take it. But man, did it get close, and that was at least a positive takeaway from what would ordinarily just be a simple Democrat loss over a Republican candidate in a very Republican area. Sometimes a loss is not just a simple loss. Many had been saying, this is deep red Tennessee. Behn has no possible chance of winning. But she really proved them wrong. Yes, she didn't win, but she came close. So it was not the guaranteed loss many had been predicting. But I think one of the most important takeaways from this recent election was energy and optimism. In election after election, one of the Democrats' biggest hurdles is voter apathy. It's their own voters not coming out to vote when it matters. When Republican voters tell their constituents to vote, they go out and they vote like their way of life depends on it. Democrat leaders do it, not so much. But what this Tennessee election showed is that right now, Democrat voters are anything but apathetic. And while yes, they weren't able to come out enough to turn the tide against the Republican candidate in that election, in other upcoming elections, they will probably be able to. This is the kind of strong fire that Democrats need going into the midterms to really do a solid sweep against Republicans. If a Democratic candidate can perform this well in a very deep, solidly red area of a solidly red state, when it comes to other states and other elections where it's not so deep, solid red, they could really perform and just flip seat after seat blue. For the first time in a long time, it feels like there's a real sense of Democratic optimism. Something it feels like we all really need at a time where sometimes it feels like all is lost and there's just one thing after another that's just awful and there's no way to get out of this hole that we're finding ourselves in. But now maybe, just maybe, there's a light at the end of that tunnel. You can feel like there's progress towards getting out and making things better again, for real. I know I, for one, am really getting tired of feeling hopeless, like under this current administration, nothing will get better and everything just seems to get worse and worse every day. So if this feels like a sign that things may be starting to get better and a cause to finally have a positive outlook on our political future, I'm all in for it. But of course, it's not all sunshine. There's still a sizable amount of Democrat voters that are very disillusioned with the Democratic Party in general and have not forgiven them for what they see as caving during the recent government shutdown, who feel that the Democratic leadership is so broken that as long as they remain in office, they will not vote at all. They're not mad enough at Democrats to vote Republican, but they feel that they will never vote for a party that they feel has abandoned them and has not stood up for them when it mattered. Winning those voters back is going to be a real struggle. And while I definitely think it's a worthwhile thing to do, I'm really not sure how they're going to convince these people that the Democratic Party is one that's worth voting for. And in a time where every election win matters, every vote matters, Democrats have about a year to figure out just how to do it. It certainly won't be easy, but I am confident that they'll be able to figure out something. And I mean, I get where they're coming from. It definitely felt right after the government shutdown like Democratic leadership failed, like the party had given up on the common people. So why shouldn't the people give up on them? And while I think that mindset is perfectly understandable under the circumstances, I think it misses the broader picture. I think, yeah, there's a lot to not really like when it comes to the high up in the Democratic leadership. While those on the right love to paint any Democrat as a radical leftist, for quite some time it's felt that we don't really have a left and right party, more like we have two right-leaning parties. One just leans extremely to the right, so Democrats seem pretty left by comparison. What many on the left have been saying for a long time is that they want a progressive Democratic Party, and what they get instead is what's basically just Republican light. And that is a hard brand to wash off. It's clear by Behn's surprisingly solid performance against a Republican opponent, even though she did end up losing, that even in ruby red Tennessee, there's still a lot of Democratic voters who are willing to come out and vote to make sure the Democrats start winning because they still believe in the party as a whole. And that to me seems like a much better way of fixing a lot of the party's faults versus just staying home and saying, well, the Democratic Party has failed me and therefore I am just not voting. You'd think those people will have learned by now that a protest of not voting because you don't approve of the Democratic candidate for whatever reason doesn't send a message to the Democratic leadership. All it does is embolden the opposition to win. You can't change them by not participating. Under our current system, a non-vote is in essence a vote for the opposition party. Sure, you're not literally adding one vote to their vote tally, but you're taking a vote away from a Democrat, making wins that much harder. I think it'd be a pretty solid bet that we're going to see a lot of close elections in the midterms, and it's vital that those close elections swing blue, swing towards Democrats and away from Republicans. Losing the House of Democrats would be a hard enough blow for Republicans, but if they could take the House and Senate, that would absolutely decimate them. And while winning the House back seems far more likely, winning the Senate is a long shot, but still possible, but only if Dems really come out in force when it comes to voting time. And Aftyn Behn's performance in Tennessee yesterday really shows that that's possible. While her run did end in a loss, I think it's definitely a sign for Democrats to not lose hope that winning is possible. It's another beacon of hope in what until recently felt like almost endless darkness. Democrats have a lot to be energized and optimistic about, and they need to keep carrying that into next year, into the midterms, and smash those Republicans. And I honestly feel like that's possible. Alright guys, that'll be it for this episode of A Slice of News. I've been your host, Mr. Slice, and until next time, when I cut you off another slice of news.